my face is all, I can feel my blood pressure rising. I don't want my blood pressure up, but a CR, come on, like, please bring me back to the days of good operational budgetary order. To help us unpack all of this, we have the Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Welcome back, Brandon Arnold.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Okay, help me step back from the ledge, because the last thing I need right now, on top of the tragedy we're experiencing as a nation, is to hear that we're going to do a CR.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's business as usual in Washington, D.C., and the speaker's exactly right. I think the House in particular has done a lot of the spade work here in order to get the government funded. But unfortunately, Democrats have been very much obstructionist, and what they're trying to do now is to hold the functioning of the government hostage over these tens of billions of dollars in plussed up Obamacare subsidies. These are subsidies that were ramped up during the COVID crisis, during the shutdown, in order to get people, make sure that they had health insurance during, a really tough time in our nation's history. Now that we're out of that period, COVID is gone. We shouldn't be subsidizing people that make nearly $500,000 with government subsidies anymore. Those subsidies need to go, and the government funding should not be held hostage over that.
So, okay, subsidies so my big thing is, I've kind of boiled it down, and I've moved on from, I want to hear about yada yada. I'm just like, mainline it to my veins. What are the cuts? Like, what reductions are there going to be? How much smaller will it be? Which agencies are getting chopped? Like, once you get me started on that, like, I'm someone where if you give me one kind of a gift and then you up your game and you blow everything out of the water with a big gift, like I get a really big gift, the next gift you give, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to revert back to the old stuff. You're going to have to keep it big because you came in hot with something amazing. You kind of blew my mind. That's what that was when I watched Doge cutting billions of dollars from the government, slashing entire agencies. When Marco Rubio was stepping up to the podium and going, yeah, we don't really have USAID anymore. A lot of the functions have been reabsorbed into the government, and we're still helping the poor and needy around the world, but we are no longer, funding Land Rovers for everybody in, some backward country and the southern tip of Africa. There were great moments, and I live for those. I revel in those highs. Brandon, will I no longer be able to receive these? I want more highs.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. I think we have made some very impressive strides. Some of the steps have been small in nature. You talk about these rescissions packages. It may be a few billion dollars there. But at the end of the day, we're moving the ball in the right direction, which is very, very different than what we've done in Washington, D.C. for the past 25 years, if not more. So, yeah, we've taken some steps in the right direction. The continuing resolution, this funding patch, it feels like a loss in some ways. But listen, if we can just hold spending level, if we see the economic growth that I think we could from the One Big Beautiful Bill, from the better tax policy that we've locked in on a permanent basis, even just holding spending level should start to close that massive budget gap that we have, where we spend $2 trillion every year more than we bring in tax revenue. So, yeah, I would like to go further, but I think just keeping our head above water at a time when, they've just been so irresponsible in Washington, that's a small victory.
It is. And so here's the thing. When we look at it, I want to add some perspective here. If you're on a weight loss journey, or if you're cutting a budget personally, if you say, oh, we only found, 3 subscriptions that we'd forgotten about, like maybe a BritBox that went from $3.99 to $7.99 recently, PBS, the PBS Masterpiece, which is all the British television, they just took their subscription up to $10.99 a month from like $6.99. So if you cut those 2 out, you might say, wow, those are tiny cuts, less than 1% of a household monthly budget. But it's also times while you were cutting those, you weren't spending new money. So there's the new money we're not spending while they're making the rescissions package cut. And then there's it's a trend. If you start trending towards cuts, even if the cuts are small, over time, it's going to stack up because it's new money that's not being spent. Because USAID's budget was actually growing every year. So it's not like when you say you reduce the size of USAID and then broke it up, eliminated the rental on the building, and put USAID inside of other agencies, whatever functions were left, you have significantly reduced the opportunity for those individual parts to increase their budgetary spend, and the overall bloat, you just carved a big chunk out of it. So I think when people say the rescissions package was small, they're not considering the totality of the impact on the budget that carving out that, I don't remember how much it was, but carving that out is also reducing the new spend that would have been on that original chunk.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And there's also just a psychological component to it because Washington is so used to spending more money. And there's a narrative in Washington that's been very powerful that if we cut agencies, if we cut spending, that we're going to have poor people dying in the streets, that it's going to be some sort of catastrophic effect, even if it's just a relatively small spending cut. Well, guess what? We're starting to make those cuts, and the nation is going to be just fine. We can afford to go back to, say, the spending levels of 2019, 2020. That was hardly the dark ages. We can go back to that point in terms of the size of our government. And the benefit, of course, will be a stronger economy when we have to borrow less money. That borrowing that we do from the federal government is pushing up interest rates, making it harder for Americans to buy a house or finance an automobile, you name it. So there's budgetary benefits, economic benefits, and I think certainly starting to turn the tide psychologically for Congress, starting to show that there is a path forward for spending cuts that yields positive economic effects.
Right. And then the positive economic effects will be felt in other areas of our government because we actually do have to increase our spending in defense. I know there are people out there who would say, no, we don't. I actually think we do. And so there's going to be the push and pull on that. I'm hoping you can keep us updated on this. Anything else we need to know because we have to kind of put this on our table. It might not be the main dish, but it has to be on the table because this is coming up.
Yeah, I think that biggest issue is those Obamacare subsidies. These are COVID plussed up subsidies. Most of that money is going to insurance companies, not to people that really need the help. The people that need the help are getting it. We need to scale back those subsidies, allow them to expire. They're scheduled to expire at the end of the year. It's not worth shutting down the government over. It's not worth spending tens of billions of dollars more on. That is the biggest issue right now in Washington.
I agree with you 100%. And I want to point people over to @NTU on X. That's where you can follow the National Taxpayers Union. And I also just want to say, I looked on National Taxpayers Union, your website @ntu.org, and you have a number of articles over here: taxpayer relief, new spending deal averts government shutdown, why government shutdowns happen and how to prevent them. These are all of the things that people can read to kind of buff themselves up. A little light reading if you're on the light rail train, or maybe you're on a plane and you're thinking, Stacy was talking about the government shutdown. You can go to ntu.org and read up on it, and then impress people with your knowledge of what might happen and why.
Thanks so much, Stacy. Appreciate that.
Good to see you, Brandon. It's great to have you back.